Let me start with something a little uncomfortable. I think a lot of people have quietly, gradually, almost imperceptibly lowered their standards for themselves. Not in a dramatic moment of giving up, not consciously, but slowly through a series of small accommodations, reasonable exceptions, and understandable compromises. The bar has moved, and at some point, they stop noticing that it's moved at all. That's what I want to talk about today. Not peak performance, not optimization, not becoming the best version of yourself like some motivational poster. Something quieter and more personal than that. Just the idea that you owe it to yourself to hold yourself to a standard, your standard, not anybody else's, whatever that honestly looks like for you. And I want to be very clear on what I'm saying because I think this topic gets hijacked by a certain aggressive self-improvement culture that I have no interest in. I'm not talking about peak performance. I'm not talking about grinding yourself into the ground in pursuit of some idealized version of yourself. I'm not talking about the kind of standard that's just self-punishment, dressed up in the language of discipline. A standard, the way I mean it, is an honest agreement with yourself about who you are and who you want to be. It's the floor, it's not the ceiling. It's the minimum expression of the person you want to be, maintained consistently, even when life gets complicated. And it looks wildly different from person to person. For one person, their standard might be running 3 times a week. For another, it might be doing 50 pull-ups a day. For someone else, it might be going on a 30-minute walk every day, without exception. There's no universal answer. The point is that you have a standard. The point is that you've thought about it honestly and that you hold to it. The interesting thing about lowered standards is that they rarely happen all at once. It's almost always gradual and it's almost always reasonable at the time. You miss a week of training because you're sick. Reasonable. You miss another week because work got busy. Reasonable. Then you have a bad month and decide, I'm going to restart in January. Reasonable. And then January comes and the bar is a little lower than it was before. And you've quietly redefined for yourself what normal looks like. And over time, the version of you from 3 years ago, from 5 years ago, they would not recognize these new standards that you have for yourself. It's not a moral failure. I cannot stress this enough. It's just entropy. It is a trend towards disorder without maintenance. That is how entropy works. That's how systems work. Standards work the same way. They require active upkeep, not because you're weak, but because life is hard and it doesn't relent. Every action you take is a vote for the kind of person you are to become. Miss enough of those votes, and you start to lose the thread of who you told yourself you were. Hold enough of those votes. Make the correct choice when those decisions come, and then identity becomes self-reinforcing. You're not someone who's trying to work out. You're someone who works out. The standard is what people like you do. This is the part that a lot of fitness and self-improvement gurus, maybe they don't spend enough time on this or they don't get it right. Holding yourself to a standard and forgiving yourself for not meeting that standard are not opposites. They are both necessary to make this work. A standard without self forgiveness becomes self punishment. It becomes that inner critic that never lets you in, that treats every missed day as an evidence of character flaw, that makes the whole enterprise so emotionally costly that eventually you'd rather just lower the standard than keep paying that price. That's not discipline. That is a slow way of quitting. But self forgiveness without a standard is just permission. It is that voice that says it's okay if you haven't moved in 3 weeks because you've been stressed, which is true. And there's seasons of your life where that will always be true. But it also doesn't actually really serve you or make you feel better in the long run. The balance, the golden mean, the balance is something the Stoics like to call equanimity. It is the ability to acknowledge that you fell short, you understand why, without excessive self criticism, and return to the standard without drama, without any fuss, not beating yourself up, not pretending it didn't happen, just getting back up on the path and walking. Marcus Aurelius failed all the time. He failed at his own standards constantly. You can see it in meditations. He is writing reminders to himself, correcting himself, noting where he came up short. The journal, it reads like a man in active but honest conversation with his own best intentions. That's the model. Not perfection, not excuses, just honest, consistent return. So, how do you actually find your standard? Well, what version of you that you respect most actually do? Not the idealized version, not the perfect version, not the peak performance version, the version that you admire and feel good about being. What does that person's week look like physically? What's the minimum you could do and still feel like yourself? This is actually a more useful question than what's the maximum you could achieve. The minimum that keeps you feeling like the person you want to be is the standard. That's the floor that you're protecting. What have you been tolerating that you know isn't okay? Most people have an honest answer right away. The standard you set is usually hiding in plain sight right in front of you. It's a thing that you avoid looking at directly. And here's the last question. If you fast forward 10 years and look back at your current life, will you have held the standard you wanted to hold? Not perfectly. Nobody's asking perfection. But honestly, on average, did you show up for yourself? Ultimately, I think holding yourself to a standard is a form of self respect, not self improvement to the hustle culture sense, not optimization, just the basic act of taking your own commitment to yourself seriously, treating the promises you make to yourself with the same weight you'd get you'd give to promises that you make to other people. Most people are much more reliable to others than they are to themselves. They'd never cancel on a friend the way they cancel on themselves. They'd never speak to someone the way they love, the way they speak to themselves. The asymmetry is worth examining in your own life. I struggle with it all the time. I'm always my harshest critic. But you owe it to yourself to look yourself in the mirror and be honest. You deserve the same reliability that you yourself give to other people. That's really all a standard is, a promise you keep most of the time, and you return to it when you don't. Zeppelin II. I'm always going to recommend Led Zeppelin. The reason I chose this album is because I think it fits well with the video. When bands have a phenomenal debut album, that becomes their standard. That becomes how fans, the record label, the critics, how they judge them. This album was recorded in between touring the same year as their first album. That is insane. It's got Whole Lotta Love, it's got Ramble On, and the rest of the album completely holds up to everything else they've ever done. Now, I don't know if Led Zeppelin, the actual people in the band, and the rock gods that they were, are the best example of holding themselves to a standard, but their music certainly did. And the album itself is amazing. Um, it captures the power of Robert Plant's voice and is a masterpiece in mixing that Jimmy Page was a genius of. And I was looking more into the history of the album, and Jimmy Page mixed this entire album in between touring in 2 days. That's crazy. Take that for what you will, but this is an album that showcases the band playing on the edge of what they can do and holds nothing back. I mean, the Lemon song alone, geez. People think that music today is too obscene. Listen to the Lemon song and get back to me. Um, but put this record on today, play it loud, because that's how it was meant to be played.